On CSS Breakdown, book by book, in Season 6, Episode 25, we open the pages of Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern British History to ask, how did Britain grapple with unprecedented economic upheaval and the siren call of extreme ideologies in the 1930s? Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of incredible sources, like Norman Lowe's book today, and really pull out the key insights, our mission today, to unpack a truly pivotal decade for Britain, the 1930s. I mean, a time of massive economic hardship, political change, and, the unsettling rise of these extreme ideologies across Europe.
Absolutely. It's a period that really tests the fabric of British society, its political system, too. We'll be looking at how the nation navigated the fallout from that global economic crash, wrestled with huge domestic challenges, and crucially, how it ultimately resisted fascism and communism, which were gaining real ground elsewhere.
So what does this all mean for Britain's legacy, its path through the century? Let's dive in. Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine the scene. Labour takes office in 1929, already a minority government needing liberal support. But almost immediately, their plans are just swamped by this global cataclysm. We all know about Wall Street. But how exactly did that crash over there send ripples all the way to Britain?
Well, what's really key here is just how interconnected the world economy was, even then. The Wall Street crash, October 29, Black Thursday, it wasn't just share prices falling off a cliff. The roots were deeper things like American overproduction, tariffs making it hard for Europe to earn money to buy American goods, or, importantly, repay war debts.
Right.
And European prosperity since about 1924, especially Germany's, really depended heavily on American loans, from the Dawes Plan. This let Germany pay reparations to Britain and France, who then paid their war debts back to the U.S. It was this delicate circle.
A house of cards, almost.
Exactly. So when the U.S. stopped imports and started calling in those short-term loans, the whole thing just collapsed. Germany was hit incredibly hard, unemployment, nearing 4 million by 31. Banks failed in Austria, Hungary. It spread fast.
But Britain, Lowe's, suggests we didn't get that same sudden dramatic shock like the U.S. or Central Europe, did we? We hadn't had the same kind of speculative boom.
That's true. The initial impact wasn't quite as sharp, but the effects were still very serious. Unemployment was already over 1 million when labor came in. By December 1930, 2.5 million. And it peaked above 3 million in 32. That's something like 23% of insured workers out of a job. Exports just plummeted, too, down by a third from 1928 levels.
So with this crisis escalating, what was the Labour government's plan? What did MacDonald and Snowden do?
They were, incredibly cautious. MacDonald and his chancellor, Philip Snowden, they basically ignored advice from economic radicals, people like J.M. Keynes, who we all know now, and even Labour's own Oswald Mosley at the time.
Mosley. Interesting.
Right.
What were they suggesting?
They were proposing things like job creation through government spending, restricting imports, subsidies for farmers, even raising the school-leaving age to 16 to keep youngsters out of the job market for a bit longer. But no, the government just cut spending, hoping the free market would somehow right itself.
And then came the May Report, July 1931. That sounds like a real turning point. What did it say?
Oh, it was grim. It forecast a massive budget deficit, 120 million by April 32, and its recommendations were drastic. Big cuts to public sector salaries. I mean, a 20% cut for teachers, plus a significant cut to unemployment benefit.
20% for teachers. Wow. And that report really spooked people.
It absolutely spooked the foreign bankers. They were already nervous after Austria's biggest bank collapsed. They basically concluded Britain was heading for bankruptcy and started pulling their gold out. The Bank of England told the government, look, you need to make cuts now. American and French bankers even made further loans conditional on a 10% cut in unemployment benefit.
So MacDonald and Snowden were willing to make these cuts, but the cabinet wasn't united.
Exactly. MacDonald and Snowden felt they had to, but the cabinet was deeply split. The benefit cut was only approved by a narrow 11-9 vote. MacDonald then argued that this minority was too large to carry on governing effectively.
So he resigned.
Well, yes, but not in the way anyone expected. This is what caused such fury in the Labour Party. On August 24th, 1931, he didn't just quit. He stayed on as prime minister, but of a new national government, a coalition with conservatives, liberals, and only 3 other Labour MPs. It looked like a total betrayal.
Betrayal is a heavy charge.
Yeah.
How do historians see it now? Was it national duty or something else?
There are different views, yeah. MacDonald's biographer, David Marquand, suggests the king and Baldwin persuaded him to put the country first, national interest above party. Robert Skidelsky, though, argues the real betrayal was MacDonald's earlier inaction failing to tackle the problem sooner. And Philip Williamson has this interesting theory that Neville Chamberlain actually engineered the national government idea to shield the conservatives from the backlash over the cuts, letting MacDonald take the political heat. But the general feeling is, at the time, most people thought it would be temporary. Nobody really foresaw it lasting 14 years.
Okay, so this national government is formed. What were its first moves to try and calm the storm?
Snowden, still chancellor for a bit, brought in an emergency budget. Income tax went up from 4 shillings 6 pence to 5 shillings in the pound. That's a fair hike. And those 10% cuts to public salaries and unemployment benefits went through. But even that didn't immediately stop the run on gold. Foreign bankers kept withdrawing funds.
Wasn't there some trouble in the Navy, too?
Ah, yes, the Invergordon Mutiny. A protest by sailors against the pay cuts. It caused a stir but fizzled out fairly quickly when the cuts were capped at 10% across the board.
But the ultimate emergency measure was yet to come, wasn't it? Going off the gold standard, September 21st, 1931.
That was the big one. It meant the pound's value dropped by about 25% internationally. So, ironically, the government failed in its original aim, staying on gold, but taking that step actually did help stabilize the immediate financial crisis. Trade didn't magically revive overnight, though, and unemployment kept rising through that winter of 32-33, hitting over 3 million.
So by October 31, they decided to go to the country, a general election. And the result was just a landslide for the national government.
Right.
554 MPs, mostly conservatives. Labor absolutely crushed, down to just 52 seats. Why such a massive swing?
Well, a lot of voters blamed Labor for the Depression itself. Unemployment had more than doubled while they were in charge, and there was this perception, maybe unfair but powerful, that Labor had sort of run away from the crisis by resigning. Meanwhile, Labor, under Arthur Henderson, had shifted leftwards, talking about real socialism as the answer. This let their opponents, including Snowden, who campaigned against his old party, run a really alarmist campaign. Snowden called Labor's plans Bolshevism run mad. There were even rumors the government would seize people's post office savings.
Wow, serious scare tactics.
Absolutely. And against all that, the national government was offering tariffs promising to protect British jobs and industry. It seemed like a concrete, immediate solution to many voters.
So once they had this huge majority, what did the national government actually do economically to try and fix things?
Well, the big one was abandoning free trade. The Import Duties Act of 1932 slapped a 10% tariff on most imports, though not from the empire. The idea was to boost British goods and raise revenue. They also cut defense spending and the interest paid on war loans.
Okay, tariffs, spending cuts.
Yeah.
What else?
They tried to reorganize some of the old staple industries, like steel, which did see a bit of a revival, helped by a tariff on foreign steel imports. Staying off the gold standard helped too, making British exports cheaper. And crucially, the bank rate was cut sharply, from 6% down to 2%.
2%. That's low.
Very low. Now, the main reason was actually to reduce the government's own debt interest payments. But an unintended consequence, a sort of accidental Keynesian boost, was that it made borrowing much cheaper for local councils, which helped fuel a boom in house building.
So looking back, how successful was this recovery? Was it all down to government policy, or were other factors at play?
That's still debated among historians. Derek Aldcroft notes that by 1937, Britain had seen a strong cyclical recovery. Income and production were actually above the 1929 peak levels, but crucially, exports never really got back to where they were.
So the recovery was mostly internal.
Exactly. It was largely domestically based, as Aldcroft puts it, powered by that housing boom we mentioned, and also the growth of newer industries. And favorable circumstances definitely helped. Raw material prices were falling, which cut production costs. The cost of living dropped, so even if wages were cut or stagnant for some, real wages, what your money could actually buy, often increased for those who still had jobs.
Right, so people in work had more spending power.
Yes, and they spent it on new consumer goods, radios, electric cookers, vacuum cleaners, even cars. Private car ownership basically doubled between 1930 and 39. People started taking holidays more, too. This consumer spending created more jobs, in manufacturing and services.
And we did see real signs of prosperity returning, didn't we? Especially in certain parts of the country. Unemployment fell significantly overall.
It did fall. From over 3 million in late 32 down to around 2 million by 35, and then about 1.4 million by late 37. And you saw booming areas, particularly the Midlands and the South. Think motor cars in Coventry and Oxford.
Yeah.
New industries thriving. Lots of people did enjoy higher living standards, moving into new council houses with modern conveniences. Cinemas, dance halls were popular. The seaside holiday became a big thing. Butlins opened its first camp in '37. Even national health improved thanks to better diets for many.
But there's always a but, isn't there? This recovery wasn't universal.
Not at all. That's the really disturbing part. While much of the country recovered, unemployment just wouldn't go away in certain areas. This was structural unemployment, different from the cyclical downturn. It created what Lowe calls the two economies of Britain.
The prosperous South and Midlands versus CM.
Versus the depressed areas, the North, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. Places heavily reliant on the old staple industries, coal, textiles, shipbuilding. These industries have been struggling since the 1880s, really hampered by lack of modernization. Some towns had shocking unemployment rates. Jarrow, 68% unemployed in 1934. Merthyr Tydfil, 62%. Compare that to St. Albans, near London, at just 3.9%.
68%. That's devastating. What was life like in those areas?
They became like ghost towns. Investment dried up. Seabaum Roundtree's survey in York found nearly a third of working-class families living in serious poverty. In Stockton-on-Tees, unemployed families were trying to survive on less than £1.50 a week. People faced debt, eviction, diet suffered, health deteriorated. Infant mortality rates were far higher in these depressed areas. Jarrow saw 114 deaths per 1,000 live births, compared to 42 down south.
And the psychological impact?
Terrible. Long-term unemployment meant losing skills, losing confidence, losing self-esteem. It led to depression, anxiety, mental health problems, just a crushing experience.
How did the unemployed themselves react? Did they just accept it?
No, there was resistance. The National Unemployed Workers Movement, the NUWM, claimed around 100,000 members by 1932. They worked with the Communist Party, organizing hunger marches, demonstrations. The most famous is the Jarrow Crusade in 1936.
Ah, yes, the March to London.
That's the one. About 200 unemployed shipbuilders walked 300 miles to London with a petition for Parliament. It captured the public's imagination, generated a lot of sympathy, but sadly, it didn't really change anything for Jarrow itself.
So what did the government do about this persistent structural unemployment?
Honestly, not very much, and not very effectively. Just like the Labour government before them, the national government seemed reluctant to spend serious money or really grasp the root causes. Their response was pretty unimaginative. The Unemployment Act of 1934 just continued the hated means test from 1931, where officials would assess a whole family's income before granting benefit.
That must have felt incredibly intrusive.
Deeply unpopular. Then there was the Special Areas Act, also 1934. It set aside £2 million for commissioners to try and help the depressed areas. But £2 million spread across all those regions. It was a drop in the ocean, really. It had limited success. The bank rate cut helped the housing boom, as we said, but that was more accidental than a targeted policy for depressed areas.
So it wasn't until the war effort ramped up.
Pretty much. By the end of 1937, overall unemployment had fallen, but the depressed areas saw little improvement. It was only really when rearmament intensified leading into 1940 that unemployment finally dropped below 1 million across the country.
Right, let's shift gears slightly. We mentioned the siren call of extreme ideologies. Communism in the USSR, fascism in Italy and Germany, powerful forces. But in Britain, they seem to have remained pretty fringe, didn't they?
Yeah.
Why was Britain different?
That's a really crucial question, and Lowe emphasizes this. In Britain, both the communists and the fascists remained small groups. Why? Well, the vast majority of British people just saw these ideologies as fundamentally undemocratic, somehow foreign, and therefore to be avoided. There seems to have been a stronger attachment to existing parliamentary democracy, flawed as it might have seemed to some.
Let's look at the Communist Party of Great Britain first. What were they actually advocating?
They formed in 1920, inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution and Marx. They wanted a classless society, common ownership, workers controlling production, a centrally planned economy, the whole dictatorship of the proletariat idea. They believed it could only happen during a major crisis of capitalism.
Which must have terrified the establishment.
Absolutely, especially since the party got funding and direction from Moscow. Even the Labour Party kept its distance. They did get some support, mainly in the depressed areas, bits of London's East End, and in some trade unions. They even had 2 MPs elected back in 1922, though they didn't make much impact.
How big did they actually get?
Membership sort of peaked around 17,000 right after the general strike in 1926, but mostly it hovered around 5,000. They were important in organizing things like the Munger Marches and soup kitchens, arguing the Depression proved capitalism was failing. But they were never strong enough to seriously attempt a revolution. Their main activity often ended up being, well, clashing with the fascists.
Okay, so what about fascism in Britain? It wasn't just Mosley initially, was it?
No, the first group were the British Fascisti, founded in 1923 by a woman named Rotha Lintorn Orman. It was mostly a reaction against socialism and the new Communist Party. They were terrified of a Bolshevik-style revolution, even thinking the 1926 general strike might be the start of one. They got up to maybe 3,000 members, but faded as the immediate communist threat seemed to recede. Many of them later joined Mosley's group.
Right, the British Union of Fascists, the BUF, founded in 1932 by Sir Oswald Mosley. We heard his name earlier, the labor politician with radical economic ideas. What happened there?
Well, after his economic plans got shot down by labor and his subsequent new party failed miserably in elections, Mosley became completely disillusioned with traditional politics. He looked abroad, particularly admiring Mussolini's Italy. He came to believe that a similar system, putting the nation above the individual, strong leadership, robust action, was the only way to solve Britain's problems.
And this involved adopting the trappings of continental fascism.
Oh, completely. The cult of the leader, Mosley himself, the black shirt uniforms, the military style, the parades, the salutes. It was very theatrical. And the BUF was explicitly anti-communist and increasingly overtly anti-Jewish.
Did they get much support, especially from more established figures? It seems quite extreme for Britain.
Surprisingly, yes, at first. Some conservatives were quite taken with Mosley's ideas about tariffs and public works, and especially his strong anti-communism. Lord Rothermere, who owned the Daily Mail, was a very public supporter for a time.
The Daily Mail, really?
Yes, in January 1934, the Mail ran the headline, "Hurrah for the Black Shirts." They basically said Britain needed a party with the same kind of energy as Hitler and Mussolini. There was a genuine fear among some conservatives that if Labor won power, a fascist counter-revolution might even be welcomed.
So the big question, did Mosley ever have a realistic shot at power? Some historians have suggested maybe, if the Depression had gone on longer.
The general consensus among historians now is probably not. It was always pretty remote. While you have historians like Stidelsky and Martin Pugh who speculate that if the Depression had worsened or lasted longer, desperate voters might have turned to him, the evidence shows fascism didn't really take root in the areas hit hardest by unemployment. The political shift seen in the mid-30s was more towards labor, not the far right.
What about that theory connecting Mosley to the Abdication Crisis? Pugh mentioned that.
Yes. The idea that King Edward VIII, who apparently admired Mosley, could have sacked Baldwin during the crisis in December 36 and appointed Mosley as prime minister.
How likely was that?
Most historians, like Ferdinand Mount, find it completely unconvincing. I mean, imagine the scene. If the king had tried that, Parliament would have exploded. There would have been uproar. The king likely would have been forced off the throne within days. It just wasn't politically feasible.
And in reality, Mosley's support collapsed pretty quickly after mid-1934, didn't it? From maybe 50,000 members down to less than 5,000 by late 36. Why the dramatic decline?
Several key things. First, the violence. The public was genuinely appalled by the thuggery of Mosley's defense force. They used rubber hoses, knuckle dusters on opponents. The meeting at Olympia in London in June 34 became notorious for the brutality of the black shirt stewards attacking hecklers. Then there was the Battle of Cable Street in October 36, a massive confrontation when the BUF tried to march through a Jewish area of London's East End and were blocked by police and anti-fascist protesters. That kind of violence really turned people off.
So the violence was one factor. What else?
Second, the anti-Semitism. While some debate its centrality, Lowe argues it was a genuine and integral part of the BUF, and it definitely provoked strong opposition and alienated potential supporters. Third, the economy was improving by 1935, and the Communist Party was losing ground, so the threats the BUF claimed to be fighting seemed less urgent.
Right, the context changed.
Exactly. And Mosley had focused on building this paramilitary movement, not a proper political party ready to fight elections. They had no real organization on the ground. Finally, the government acted. The Public Order Act of 1936 banned political uniforms, gave police more power to control meetings, and ban marches. That really cramped the BUF's style and visibility.
So in the end, Britain avoided revolution from either extreme.
Precisely. Conditions just weren't as dire as they were in Germany or Italy. The economy did recover for most people by the late 30s, outside those depressed areas. The communist threat was never that serious. And Mosley himself, with his arrogance and the violent image of the black shirts, just didn't win widespread trust. By the time war broke out in 39, the BUF was seen as tainted by Nazism, quickly banned in 1940, and Mosley was locked up.
Now, alongside all this economic turmoil and political extremism, the 30s threw up another completely different kind of crisis, one right at the heart of the establishment, the Abdication Crisis of 1936.
Yes, quite extraordinary. George the Feudal died in January 36. His successor was his eldest son, Edward VIII. 41, unmarried, popular, seemed quite modern and genuinely concerned about unemployment. He famously toured South Wales and said something will have to be done.
But his personal life created a huge problem.
He was deeply in love with Wallis Simpson, an American woman. Crucially, she was not only divorced from her first husband, but currently married to her second, a London stockbroker. In October 36, she got her second divorce, clearing the way, in Edward's mind, for them to marry. Now, remarkably, the British press initially kept quiet about the whole affair.
A voluntary censorship.
Sort of, yes, a gentleman's agreement. But the story couldn't be contained forever, and this is where Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin had to step in.
What did Baldwin do? It must have been incredibly delicate.
He handled it very carefully but firmly. He told Edward point blank that marrying a twice-divorced American simply wouldn't be acceptable to the government or, he believed, the British public. He warned the king that if he insisted against the cabinet's advice, it would provoke a major constitutional crisis. Baldwin said he'd have to resign, and no other party leader would agree to form a government under Edward in those circumstances.
Putting the king in an impossible position.
Essentially, yes. The story finally broke big in the newspapers on December 3rd. Suddenly, it was this huge public drama.
Was public opinion divided? Were there people supporting the king?
Oh, yes, there was definitely debate. Some high-profile figures like Winston Churchill, even Oswald Mosley briefly, and newspaper barons like Beaverbrook and Rothermere argued the king should be free to marry whomever he loved. But the dominant view quickly sided with Baldwin.
Why was the opposition so strong?
Several reasons. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Lang, argued that the king, as head of the Church of England, couldn't marry a divorcee whose ex-husbands were still alive. The Times newspaper captured the mood, stating the monarchy would be fatally weakened if private inclination were to come into open conflict with public duty and be allowed to prevail. There was a strong sense of propriety and duty involved.
Did Edward try to find a compromise?
He did. He floated the idea of a morganatic marriage, where Wallis could marry him but wouldn't become queen and would remain a private citizen. The cabinet flatly rejected that. Faced with that, Edward decided he had no choice but to abdicate.
And so he did. December 11th, 1936.
Yes. Succeeded immediately by his younger brother, who became George VI, the current queen's father. Edward became the Duke of Windsor, married Wallis Simpson the following year, and they lived most of the rest of their lives in exile, mainly in France.
Baldwin got a lot of credit for how he managed it all, didn't he? It seemed to restore his standing for a while.
He was widely praised at the time, yes. He'd navigated a potential disaster, avoided a damaging constitutional showdown, preserved the monarchy's stability, and ensured a smooth transition to George VI and Queen Elizabeth, who quickly became very popular figures, especially during the war. Baldwin retired soon after, in May 1938.
Though his reputation took a hit later.
Ironically, yes. After World War II broke out in September 1939, Baldwin, along with Chamberlain, was heavily blamed for Britain's lack of preparedness and the policy of appeasement in the preceding years. So his handling of the abdication, seen as a triumph at the time, was later overshadowed.
What an incredible decade. A real pressure cooker for Britain economic collapse, the stark social divisions, these flirtations with extreme ideologies, and then a crisis involving the king himself.
It really was. And if you zoom out, Britain's path through the 1930s looks quite distinctive compared to many other European countries. That ability to weather the economic storm, however imperfectly, and to ultimately reject those totalitarian movements without democracy collapsing. It's quite remarkable. The strength of existing institutions, perhaps, and that deep-seated public suspicion of anything seen as undemocratic and foreign, as Lowe puts it.
It really underscores how a nation's internal resilience, its political culture, can shape its response to global crises.
Absolutely. And it leaves you wondering, doesn't it, how much did the memory of things like the general strike failing just a few years earlier, combined with that inherent distrust of these foreign ideologies, act as a kind of inoculation against the radicalism sweeping Europe? And perhaps, what lessons can we draw from that today when societies face their own unique pressures and divisions?